No matter what world one explores, there will always be past events that shape much of what the present version of that world looks like by the events of the presented movies, games, shows, and even that of the real world. Final Fantasy X is no different. Even though it is not directly mentioned in the game, nor is it a major part of the present storyline, many details in the game indicate that Spira once witnessed a huge-scale battle between two of its biggest cities, Bevelle and Zanarkand. This war speaks of the defeat of Zanarkand by the forces of Bevelle, and subsequently the last-ditch effort of Zanarkand's leader Yevon to preserve Zanarkand by turning its inhabitants into faith and conjure a dream version of the original Zanarkand, which is in ruins by the events of Final Fantasy X. But what if we turn back the clock, back to the Machina War, and completely reverse its outcome? What would happen in the years following, and how would this all play out to the war's endgame? In a recent poll, you chose for me to cover this topic. This is being released soon after the poll was made, as I had both scripts prepared for both scenarios prior to making this poll. I have prepared the scenario, but I am just talking about the events prior to Final Fantasy X, because it is safe to say that the storyline would be very different with this alternate timeline. Instead, I will just be talking about the changes to the world of all of Spira. So here is today's installment of the alternate timeline series, where we take a look at what would happen if Bevelle lost the Machina War to Zanarkand. When we take a closer look at the cities at a time where Machina was thriving and present in every town, village, and city in Spira, we have to take a look at its usage in both Bevelle and Zanarkand. Based on a novel, Final Fantasy 2.5, it is known that Bevelle was the technologically stronger military force over Zanarkand. This is likely because they instructed the Bidor, the ancestors of the Albed, to invest more in weaponry to build Bevelle's armed forces. Zanarkand, on the other hand, had made the use of Machina to further grow their technological advancements, focusing on everyday life and utilities, but did not make the same investment into military as Bevelle had done, instead relying on the power of summoners and magic. Similar to the original timeline, due to the close proximity of the two cities and their growing powers, Bevelle had decided to attack first, making sure Zanarkand could not get an upper hand by making the preemptive strike. Bevelle had gained the upper hand due to its Machina causing great destruction against Zanarkand's inferior force. Even the use of summoners was not enough to counter the superior force of the Machina that the Bidor had developed in the years leading up to the war. So Zanarkand lost, and as a result, Sin was born to protect the dream Zanarkand Yevon had conjured using the faith of Zanarkand, while causing great destruction in Spira. In this alternate timeline, however, Yevon comes up with a plan. With its spies installed in Bevelle, like the one that found Shuyin heading to activate Vegnagun and had returned to warn Len of its whereabouts, Yevon had instructed his spies to convince the Bidor to sabotage Bevelle's weapons and make them useless in the fight against Zanarkand. The Bidor, seeing the destruction that their creations are causing to Zanarkand, comply with the request and sabotage all of Bevelle's weapons, rendering them unusable in battle. This would change the tide of battle into Zanarkand's favor, as its forces would not only repel Bevelle's army, but also make the advance down Mount Gagazet through the Calmlands into the city of Bevelle. With Bevelle's morale low due to the malfunction of its own weapons, the unstable nature of Bevelle's leadership, plus the increased morale of Zanarkand's own forces as well as its summoners, Bevelle surrendered without condition, and Yevon gained control of the city. During the advance, Len joins a group of guards in sweeping through Bevelle in search of Shuyin, who was on the verge of activating Vegnagun. She stops him after telling him that Zanarkand's forces had won and were currently invading Bevelle. This causes Shuyin to not activate Vegnagun, and instead is seen by Yevon, who orders for Vegnagun to remain after being informed that it could not distinguish friend from foe. But it keeps it intact for future experiments and uses, restricting access to only Yevon and his most trusted associates. Now with Yevon established as the sole leader of both Zanarkand and Bevelle, he appoints his daughter Yunalesca and Lord Zeon to be the leaders of Bevelle while he rules over Zanarkand. Initially, they rule in peace, ushering a new era of prosperity in Spira. However, Yevon grew paranoid of another war breaking out and potentially destroying his city of Zanarkand, a fear he likely had in the original timeline, which resulted in his resolve to preserve the ancient city in the first place. But with control of Spira's two most powerful cities, he decides to expand his rule to all of Spira. With the combined powers of Bevelle and Zanarkand, all the other cities fall to Yevon with either little to no resistance, thus making Yevon the conqueror of all Spira. While we know little detail about the purposes of each city in ancient Spira we can make an assumption that Yevon did not change their purpose, as long as they did nothing that would indicate an uprise or rebellion to his rule. This would be done through such methods such as installing those loyal to Yevon to govern the cities in Spira, which includes the likes of Besaid, Kilika, Luca, and the Mihan High Road, and even the Machina city that lies in Beaconel Island. When Yevon grew old and eventually died, he remained an Unsent. In the original timeline, he remained alive due to the protection that Sin gave him, causing him to take on a parasitic form over time. In this alternate timeline, he becomes an Unsent, but maintains his human form, as he believed that without his leadership and guidance, Spira, specifically his Zanarkand, will fall into chaos and war. In addition, Yunalesca and Zeon also remain Unsent as they stand by their father's side as he rules Spira for the next 1,000 years. Within this time, many people have attempted to form rebellions and armies to contest the power of Yevon, but the combined powers of Bevelle and Zanarkand, along with the support of all cities in Spira, proved to be too much for any of these attempts. While there are those who oppose the now oppressive rule of Yevon, there are those who have revered his longevity, believing him to be a god. Cults have also been established that praise Yevon and his guidance, similar to the Yevon religion in the original timeline. Their role in the world of New Spira is to spread propaganda to discourage people fighting Yevon and war breaking out in Spira. Propaganda methods include spreading fear, violence, and public executions on those who oppose Yevon, to even spreading rumors about Yevon's secret weapon, referring to Vegnagun that lies on the depths of Bevelle. The temples in each of the cities have now become the main government buildings where the leaders of each cities are established. There are many notable things that happen in this timeline that do not in the original timeline, with the major one being that Tidus never exists due to the Dream Zanarkand never being created. However, both Shuyan and Len live, and it is likely that a version of Tidus would exist in the alternate timeline that would be a descendant of Shuyan. Another major event is that while the Horror of Sin does not shadow all of Spira, Yevon still has control over it, only in a more direct means of doing so. Other small details include the Crusaders never being formed, and the Bidor, while playing a significant role in the events of the new Spira, is still being suppressed by Yevon out of fear that they may revolt against him directly, as well as the ritual of the final summoning not existing. And that sums up many of the events that would occur if Zanarkand defeated Bevelle 1,000 years before the events of Final Fantasy X. Due to the magnitude of this event in Spira's timeline, it was obvious that a lot of details would change, which is why I did not cover anything that would have happened in the new Final Fantasy X, as 1,000 years is a long time for many things to change, and it is definitely clear that the new Final Fantasy X would be nowhere near close to what the original would have been. Except perhaps for Yevon and Yunalesca still alive and would have likely served as the real antagonists of the game as opposed to the parasitic Yevon in the original timeline. What do you think? What events would change in the timeline if Zanarkand would have defeated Bevelle in the Machina War? What would a Spira that was still technologically advanced look like? Let me know in the comment section below, and let me know what other topics you'd like me to cover in the future. Leave a like if you enjoyed, as it would help to spread videos to a wider audience, and consider subscribing if you want to see more. Other than that, this is Enzo signing out, and that, as they say, is that.